Reading out this review for the Mark of the Rani from the DWRG, written by Finn Clark, published on the 3rd of the 3rd, 09. I like Mark of the Rani. Admittedly, this is partly my fault for pretty much liking all of Doctor Who, but it strikes me as a minor but completely solid runaround with plenty of charm. Its main problem is that it got made in 1985. Admittedly, that's more than enough for many people, but I didn't hold that against it. I like Colin and Nicola. Admittedly, there's also Jane T, Eric Saywood, Anthony Ainley, and Pip Jane Baker to be taken into consideration, but I've got plenty of time. Taking those characters in order, we can overlook the producer and script editor. Saywood didn't touch these scripts because he hated Pip and Jane, who were commissioned over his head. This explains the mysterious lack of mercenaries and sadism. Instead, there's a surprising amount of whimsy, which one tends to overlook in a story of Time Lords, technobabble, and the coal mining industry. I shouldn't think Saywood even noticed it. I love the minefield of trees and the Master's Scarecrow disguise, while there's a slightly fairy tale air to the setting of Dells, Groves, and Stevenson's steam engine. Despite itself, this story looks rather beautiful. Admittedly, the story is in love with science and has a techno-Darwinian theme of the new superseding the old, but it still makes time to consider the mysteries of nature. The Rani represents unfettered progress no matter what the cost, but Stevenson is going to change the world, and the Doctor takes a more holistic view. His solutions involve herbal medicine and turning technology against its user, which makes a change from acid baths. He even quotes Shakespeare's "dreamt of in your philosophy" at her. I admire all that. Unfortunately, this aesthetic is only bits and pieces. The second half mostly drops the pseudo-historical angle in favour of its free, squabbling Time Lords, and it's hard to see Alice in Wonderland subtleties when you're drowning in 1980s BBC sci-fi and the finest overacting of Colin Baker, Kate Amara, and Anthony Ainley. I like them. They're great fun. It's pantomime, but sometimes all you want is a good pantomime villain, and here we have two of them. I nearly said three, but that wouldn't be fair. Nevertheless, the 19th century world stuff was lovely, and it's a shame to ditch it. Of course, the complication is that they're spouting Pip and Jane Baker babble in another of the story's idiosyncrasies. I liked that too. This story gets bashed for their language, but I personally think it works. For starters, it's subtler than it looks at first glance. We don't just get highfalutin Gallifreyans, but instead a full range of voices. Look at the humans. They get dialogue appropriate to their era and station in life, with the miners talking more crudely than Lord Ravensworth. Unfortunately, later Pip and Jane stories would give us no respite from the thesaurus, but I genuinely like what they're doing here. There's Shakespeare, Northern dialect, etc. It's rich and interesting. What's more, I approve of Time Lords not talking like ordinary people, but instead stretching children's vocabularies. Even if I don't necessarily agree with the extent to which Pip and Jane tended to take that principle, besides everyone's relishing their lines, give this lot a chance to overact and they'll eat it up with a spoon. Let's not overstate the acting resources on display, mind you. There's Perry. That girl needed to whine less and concentrate on getting into mortal peril. However, the free Time Lords are wonderful, with the Rani coming out and saying what we were all thinking about Ainley's master. Meanwhile, the master is being staggeringly vile for no reason at all, using people as pawns and destroying lives. He's having fun. No motivation behind that whatsoever, which would make this the point where he officially became an unhinged psychopath. One might think he had a plan in mind when he tells Luke to destroy anyone trying to cancel the meeting, but it's not clear why he should care beyond random malevolence, and he then changes his mind, makes the Rani a proposition anyway. Then there are the guest actors, doing solid work in thankless roles. Terence Alexander as Lord Ravensworth manages to make something out of a weak final line, for instance. Similarly, Luke Ward and George Stephenson aren't showy roles, but you couldn't ask for more from Gordon Granger and Gary Cady. It's admirable to see, but it's a shame that they didn't get more to do in the first place. You get that kind of thing a lot in this era's pseudo-historicals, but this is clearly the worst example of it. I don't mind Saywood's mercenary fetish, but I do object to his lack of interest in the plebs. Admittedly, he had nothing to do with this story, but I'm making sweeping generalizations here. Didn't he torpedo Pat Mills as the space whale because he couldn't buy a working-class starship captain? Point at a single character in any story like this, on par with, say, Lawrence Scarman worried about his brother. Half the time they're being mind-controlled anyway. The Visitation, Pterodactyl control bracelets, King's Demons, Chameleon, The Awakening, which is at least a bit more subtle about it, Mark of the Rani, Hypnosis and Maggots, and The Ultimate Foe, if you think that counts. That's my problem with this story. Nothing else. The Time Lords have no meaningful opposition beyond each other. It's the Visitation all over again. One thing the 21st Century series has got right is that it's pseudo-historicals aren't populated entirely by non-entities only there to be bossed around by time travelers. Note that in episode 1, the Rani doesn't do anything. She milks brains and makes sarky comments. It's the Master who's being villainous, but it seems so petty since his victims are so dizzyingly far below his league. He's playing with miners who've been brain-sucked by the Rani. Formidable opposition can make him look impressive, but here he's like a child squashing ants. At least in Planet of Fire you can remember the names of the people he deceives. Incidentally, it's an unusual story structure for Doctor Who in that the villain with a plan had her operation up and running before anyone else got here. Thus, the story doesn't really have a structure in the normal sense. Episode 2 is just lots of random peril. It's still fun though, even if it's pretending to be based around a MacGuffin, the meeting that never happens. It's fun to watch Luke being evil, and of course I relished the Dr. Master backchat as the Rani fetches Perry from the Dell. I even like the tree. No, scratch that. I adore the tree. I like it when Doctor Who doesn't play it safe, but instead goes a bit mad, and so for me a groping fake rubber tree is one of the highlights of the entire series. The production is also great. The Rani's TARDIS is awesome. While it's worth pointing out that this is to date the show's one and only Tyrannosaurus, not to be a joke, yet it appears in multiple versions for barely seconds. Overall, this is a gentle story of which I'm really rather fond. It's never going to make a list of all-time classics, but it's also pleasant and does nothing wrong. It's funny and almost sweet. It looks terrific, the music's nice, and it's an object example for dictators everywhere. Forget the Master in Last of the Time Lords. Look at what the Rani's doing here for her Myazimia Gorians. Now that's job dedication.